There are five major psychic senses. I will list them here in order of most commonly used to most rarely used. You may notice that one of the five may stand out more so than the others. This is because you may have had experiences that have utilized one or more of these senses. Whenever I have read books that begin to describe the various psychic senses, I tend to become bored fairly quickly. It always seems to be the same basic information and descriptives. Because of this, I've tried to go into much more detail regarding the various senses and my own personal experience of the ways we use them when actively engaged in psychic sensing. Clairvoyance. The first psychic sense and the most commonly used one is clairvoyance. Clairvoyance is the ability to see using the physical or mental eye. Many people have reported seeing visual phenomenon when having a supernatural experience. When you encounter psychic energy, your brain may activate the visual sensors of the mind, and you may see something as physical and in your immediate environment. This is similar to a film projector that takes slides or film and superimposes those images on a surface in front of it. Your mind has the same capacity, and in an attempt to identify and make sense of that psychic energy, it begins to activate those visual capabilities and corresponding visual effects. That is why people describe seeing apparitions or phenomenon that seem to fade in and out, or may disappear suddenly. The other aspect of clairvoyance, and the one that I'm very experienced in, is the mind's eye. You are not seeing from the physical eyes, but rather from the memory and visualization centers in the brain. Everything you have seen and experienced in your mind has been stored in the form of memory. Those visuals reside there until they are triggered by something that corresponds to them. This is the reason hieroglyphics were so popular in ancient Egypt. Visual memory is one of the strongest ways to communicate information. We still use this to this day. Visit any country in the world and look at the signs used for directions. Regardless of the language barrier, many of those signs may be fairly similar to those we use in our own immediate region. Visual information correspondence is another reason why emojis have become so popular when text messaging. This form of communication is a natural function of the brain and a simple way to share information and communicate understanding. As you develop, regardless of your preference, you will begin to utilize this ability more and more. Clairsentience. Many people underestimate the power of emotions. We use them every day, almost as much as we use our own visual abilities. They can help us understand many things about the environment and people around us. We also store a lot of information and emotions. When I use the word upset, it doesn't just apply to one experience. It can apply to many types of experiences where you felt upset. You can be upset from running out of coffee or from getting a traffic ticket. I'm sure there are many experiences you can relate to where you became upset. Here's an example of how an emotion can hold information for you. Think back to a time you were angry or found something infuriating. Now think about the experience that caused you to feel this. Describe what it was about that experience that made you angry. Did you stub your toe? Did you overpay for a service? Did someone say something to you that was terrible? Did you see something that triggered that anger? Were you angry at the treatment you received from your boss? Did you feel helpless with your political leaders and become angry with all the red tape required to get anything done? Anger just doesn't have one experience it can be triggered by. It can become activated by numerous events and circumstances, and each of those felt different in some way or another. I remember the first time I found out an ex-boyfriend was cheating on me. I was infuriated. Today, I have such empathy for those who go through similar experiences because I've been there and I know what it feels like. That experience imprinted all of these bits of information along with it. So when I encounter that type of situation for another person, I also have the capacity to feel all of the details associated with that emotional experience. People don't realize this, but many times in a reading, when I am trying to focus on the answer to a question and I can't see it, I immediately switch over to my empathy. I try to sense any emotions that may correlate or correspond to the answer. The more comfortable you get with feeling and identifying variances in emotional experience, the better you'll get at indicating what types of circumstances may be occurring to bring those about. Claircognizance. As I mentioned in my psychic awakening story, after I had opened myself up to this human potential, I began having psychic experiences. On one occasion, shortly after the kitchen fire incident, I had another event happen while I was in front of my family members. We were having dinner together. My aunt and cousin had come over and had already served themselves. I walked over to the fridge to get a drink, and then for no reason at all, I simply stopped dead in my tracks and my lips began to move. I could hear myself speak but wasn't engaged in the process of speaking. I heard myself say, "The lights are going to go off." My aunt spoke up first and told me not to say things like that because they could happen. Apparently, an old Hispanic folk superstition. No sooner did she finish her sentence that the lights went out. Not only did they go off in the house, they went off in the entire block. Apparently, an electric transformer blew down the street from our house a few moments after I made my statement. This is an example of having precognition or claircognizance. There's no thought process, feelings, or intuitive indicators. You just suddenly know what you know what you know. If you scope the web, you can hear many other stories from people whose first psychic experience was something similar. People tend to become so consumed with their daily lives, checklists, and mental chatter that they are completely unaware of the everyday psychic experiences they are having. You are receiving regular psychic information through clairvoyance and clairsentience. You don't even know it. Because you are so unaware, you don't recognize it as it is happening to you and just shrug it off to one of those things or a coincidence. When a claircognitive event happens, you definitely take notice because it's so shocking to our daily norm for us to just know something, especially before it happens, without having any prior knowledge. Once you begin to utilize your other psychic skills, you'll naturally develop more of this capacity. It comes down to aligning with the mental and emotional energy and being in the right receptive state. Many times when I am doing a reading or mediumship session, I begin to speak about things and naturally assume a bit of information that I couldn't have known. Just the other day, as I was in a reading, I kept talking to a client about her family's property near the beach in California. She thought it was funny that I kept talking about California and her family there, as she never mentioned it. She found it fascinating that I spoke of it as if I just knew. She then confirmed that she did in fact grow up in California and her family still lived there. I didn't even notice I began talking about California until she mentioned it. This is claircognizance. Clairalience. Clairalience is the process of identifying smells through the physical or mental nose. This is one of those psychic skills that tends to show up more often when dealing with mediumship. During a session, it isn't surprising that I'll begin to smell the scent of cigarette smoke or Elizabeth Taylor's White Diamonds, despite the fact that my client does not smoke or wear the scent themselves. You can smell things using the physical nose, but in most cases, people may smell things using the mind's nose. It triggers the same reaction or thinking process that would occur if you were actually smelling the scent in the physical. In Hispanic culture, it is quite common to smell roses when you are encountering spirit energy or high religious energy like that of the Virgin Mary. The reason for this is not because these hold such significance. The scent of roses following such experiences is a cultural norm, and so would follow such occurrences. When the energy is encountered, the mind then begins to activate any associated memory references, including certain scents. My friend and teacher, professional psychic detective Pam Coronado, occasionally smells the scent of pooled blood when she is working on violent cases with police officers. She will pick up on this smell even though it has been years, and in some cases decades, since the original crime was committed. Clairgustance. Clairgustance, like Clairalience, is another sense that tends to show up more when using mediumship. I cannot tell you how often I become hungry and crave certain foods or candy, like caramel or wine, when I am connected with a spirit. The memory and taste become so apparent in my mind and sometimes even on my tongue that it can be quite distracting. During one specific memory, my partner's sister had lost a good friend from work. She reached out to me to see if I could try to connect. Normally, I don't like reading for family members or friends, as you'll find out later in this course, but on this occasion, I agreed to give it a shot. I had a full day of clients, including mediumship sessions, so I had planned on connecting back with her at the end of the day. Once I was done with my sessions, I was so tired and drained, and I didn't think I would be able to connect properly and bring through quality messages, so I waited a while to see if I could recoup my energy. I laid on the couch when I suddenly began to crave a Cosmopolitan, the drink. It became such a strong craving that I began scouring the web for easy recipes. The funny thing is that I'm not much of a drinker. I may have 10, maybe 15 drinks a year at most, and I'm more of a wine or Jack and Coke kind of guy. But I really wanted a Cosmo. I had never had one, so I wasn't sure what was causing this random craving. I made my shopping list and headed for the liquor store. My partner was also surprised I was actually going to a liquor store because he knew that I wasn't a drinker either. He didn't understand where this sudden urge to drink a Cosmo was coming from. When I returned home, I made my drink per the recipe online and began drinking as if I'd been deprived for years. The buzz began to hit me, and I realized that I was in no condition to attempt a mediumship connect for my partner's sister. I felt so bad and began to text her an apology and my reason for being unable to do so. She understood, and then it started up in my head. A little voice, my voice, but not exactly the same, began to chirp away in my mind. I'm here, tell her it's me, it said, as I deleted my last sentence and began to realize that maybe my recent rush for a Cosmo perhaps wasn't mine to begin with. I asked his sister if her friend drank Cosmos. She responded with a picture of her friend sitting at a table with, you guessed it, a Cosmo in her hand. Apparently, it was her favorite drink, and because of her health condition, was unable to drink any alcoholic beverages. The mystery was finally solved, and my buzz almost instantly went away, as if I had not had a single sip. Clairaudience. Clairaudience is the ability to hear things through your physical or mind's ears. There are many stories in which people speak of instances where they have heard the voice of their loved ones shortly after their passing. I've also heard tales of people hearing an inner voice that warns them of an impending event or situation. Just like with my own experience regarding the kitchen fire, you can learn to hear in your mind a voice that takes the form of your own and gives you guidance. I've come to realize that there are subtle differences between your own thinking voice and the voice of your higher self or guides. In my case, it was most likely the voice of my spirit guide giving me a heads up about the impending crisis I was going to be faced with. Similar to Clairalience and Clairgustance, when encountering corresponding psychic energy, the auditory centers of your brain kick into gear and activate any memory that matches up to the energy you are encountering. If you attempt to connect to an animal spirit or deceased family pet, then it is very possible that you may hear an auditory bark in your physical ears. The memory of hearing a bark may also become triggered in your mind. Very often during a mediumship session, I may hear the music of a mariachi band playing or an 80s song I may be familiar with. When I first began to develop music, all kinds of music would play continuously in my mind. It was like someone had switched on a radio and my brain kept jumping from song to song to song. It was so overwhelming that I would simply sing what it was that I was hearing. A word of advice. Never do this when you have just started to date someone. It didn't really work out in my favor, and I doubt that it will work out in yours. These are the primary psychic senses that you will begin to develop through the exercises in this class. We will focus most of our attention on developing the visual and emotional skills. Don't worry, the others will naturally feed off of these abilities and develop along with them.